Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue and conclude the series of Q&A videos that I have had the real great pleasure in conducting over the course of these last couple months on this channel. And I really want to thank you again for expressing an interest in this channel and what it is I have to say about certain questions. I'm very flattered and I'm very moved and humbled by this, so thank you very much for expressing an interest. And by my count, therefore, this is going to be Q&A part 20. Before I begin, let me say that this will be the last of these videos, the Q&A videos. I've been so fortunate to have received a lot of great questions, and so, as I say, over the course of these past about 2 months or so, I've been trying to answer all of the questions I've received, to the best of my ability in this video format. And so with this video, by my count, we have done 20 videos on this channel on the Q&A that I had initiated back in April. And so I was very happy about that, and I was very happy to be able to share with you just a little bit more about myself and my background for those who are interested in listening. So once again, thank you very much for expressing an interest in who I am and what it is I might have to say about certain topics and certain questions. And so, on the one hand, I'm a little bit sad, actually, to be ending these Q&A videos with this last video. However, let me say that I am very encouraged by the response, and so maybe we can do another Q&A type of thing later this year, if you don't mind, and we can continue this in earnest. It's just, I hope you can understand, it's just that I really want to maybe how should I put it, we can end this particular set of Q&A videos here, and then maybe we can pick this up again later this year, maybe a few months from now or something, if you're interested. So please stay tuned to this YouTube channel for any further updates on that, and I'll try to make room for that later this year wherever possible. So this particular series will end with this video today, but we can always do this in the future, and if you're interested, I will try to make room for that, as I say, later, and maybe later this year, a few months from now, perhaps. And if you want to ask me a question about anything in particular, you can always leave a comment under a video, and I will do my best to respond accordingly. So, and if you want to reach me, you can always reach me via other means, and so if you want to try to do so, I'm always try to make myself as open as possible. I can't claim to know everything, because I don't, and I can't claim to be able to answer every single question, but I will certainly do my best. And so if you're interested, please feel free to let me know at any time. But with that, my friends, let me now direct my attention to this last batch of questions that I received. So picking up where I last left off, I am now going to be answering. The question is from Benntura. So hello, Benntura. I hope you're well, my friend. And you say, "Hi, Daisuke. This is a 3-part question. Number 1, did you ever watch any movies on the old HD DVD format? Number 2, if yes, was it as good or better than Blu-ray? 3, why did Blu-ray beat out HD DVD as the preferred format? Thanks. Okay, so thank you very much for your set of questions. I'm very appreciative of this. And to answer your first question, did you ever watch any movies on the old HD DVD format? No, I didn't. And I never was able to watch anything on HD DVD. And so, and that's not, I guess it's just, I was never a, I guess the opportunity never presented itself based on my own circumstances at the time. So, no, I was never able to watch anything on the HD DVD format. And so, to answer your second question, if yes, so I didn't watch anything. So, I'm not able to provide any kind of comparative analysis in terms of the video quality, at least as far as I was able to, as far as my own personal experiences, because I don't have any personal experience with this, unfortunately. But then you say, number 3, why did Blu-ray beat out HD DVD as the preferred format? And your guess is as good as mine. I'm no insider into the format and the format wars and that sort of thing. Although I could say that perhaps as a kind of outsider speculation on this, these sorts of things with respect to formats and Blu-rays and physical media formatting, etc., these are all usually the result of technologies owned by certain interested parties, and these parties tend to or they might have a certain influence in the marketplace, and so depending on what their developments are, then that might have an effect on how certain new emerging markets are formed. And so this all has to do with the technologies and who owns the technologies and how the technologies are then to be adapted and to be commercialized in the most optimum way. And we also have to remember that these technologies are usually not owned by one single party. They are often found to be owned by different parties, because there are many different sub-technologies that make up the format that we understand to be, say, the Blu-ray format or the DVD format. And so therefore, a number of technologies are required in order to be able to implement these sorts of technologies in a kind of commercial way. And so that's my general understanding of these sorts of these sorts of things. And so. But then again, I'm no real expert when it comes to this particular occurrence in the format development history. I've read up a little bit about it, but unfortunately I'm not the biggest expert on this, so I'm afraid I can't answer your question beyond my general statements right now. So, but I'm very sorry about that. But I really thank you very much for your questions, my dear friend, and I hope you're well. Thank you. Next, the question is from Paco Silva. So, hello, my friend. And you say, hello, Daisuke. I already asked you a few questions, but since you keep doing this, I thought about another question that you may find interesting. The question is, if you had to record an audio commentary for any film of your choosing, which films would you pick? Okay, that's a very interesting question. Audio commentary tracks are, I think, in their own way, their own kind of art form. And it takes a certain type of scholar and intelligence to be able to conduct one of those, because you have to be able to sustain interest over usually a long period of time, about an hour and a half or 2 hours or so. And that can be very difficult. And you really have to time it appropriately. And so there are all these factors that go into audio commentary tracks. And so based on that alone, I could never imagine myself being able to even possibly consider being able to do an audio commentary track, because I'm not that good at that. So anyone who's able to do an audio commentary track with skill really gets a lot of respect for me. So I understand, or I not understand, but I can really appreciate how difficult putting together an audio commentary track is. And so on the one hand, I could say that it's a great question, but it's really hard for me to answer on the one hand because of this kind of skill set that I understand audio commentary tracks require. And I personally, I understand that for my own personal situation, I don't own that skill set. I don't have that skill set. But if I were to choose a film that I could talk about in an audio commentary, I suppose, and again, I don't claim to have any kind of expertise in terms of production, in terms of the manner in which the film was made, the production history, and things of that nature. I could only give an audio commentary track as a fan of the film, and that's the extent of it. So I don't think it would be that worthy of an audio commentary track to begin with anyway, because it wouldn't be giving a lot of detailed information about the film. It would just be sort of perspective from a fan, more or less. But I think if I could choose a film, I think it would be something like maybe a Godzilla film. I like a number of the Godzilla films, and so maybe something like, oh gosh, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. That would be an interesting one to try to do. But once again, it's a real art form, and it does require a certain a real set of skills, which I don't have. But that might be an interesting one. So anyway, Paco Silva, thank you so much for your great question, my friend, and I hope you are well. So thank you and cheers. Thank you. Next, we have a question from Martin Alexis Franco. So hello, and thank you for your question. And you ask, hey Daisuke, what a great channel. Love the passion you have for cinema is admirable. Here is a quick question. Do you have tattoos? Have you ever considered getting the Criterion logo in your body? Haha, I think it would suit you very well. Greetings from Argentina. Okay, so you're asking if I have tattoos, and you're asking if I've ever considered getting a Criterion Collection logo as a tattoo somewhere on my body as a tattoo. Okay, so I don't have any tattoos, and I don't have anything against tattoos or body art of that nature. But for me personally, I don't have any tattoos, and I've never considered getting a tattoo. But as I say, I don't have anything against that. I think anyone who is into that kind of body artwork, I think that's really great. And so there's that. But for me personally, I don't have any. And also, I should just maybe bring up that in certain areas of Japanese society, tattoos even now have a certain, how should I say, there's still a little bit of a social stigma that is associated with tattoos and body art. And so it's changed gradually over time, my sense is, because perhaps maybe 5, 10, 20 years ago, perhaps, for instance, if one had a tattoo on one's body, then that would be reason for, let's say, you wouldn't be granted entry into a bathhouse, or maybe a golf club wouldn't allow you membership, or there are other places like sports clubs, gyms, and weight training facilities, that sort of thing. Sometimes if one had a tattoo, then one wouldn't be allowed membership. And because there is a certain stigma that is associated with tattoos here in Japan, and whether that's right or wrong, I mean, that's a different issue entirely, but the fact remains that there is still this stigma. My sense is that this attitude towards body art and tattoos has relaxed somewhat over time. So for example, I mentioned the the example of sports clubs. And there is a sports club that I belong to here, and their policy is if you have a tattoo on your body, then as long as you keep it covered up, then you are allowed membership. But you must keep it covered up when you're working out or when you're in the locker room or something of that nature. And so that means, therefore, that before, where one might have been denied membership by virtue of the fact that one had a tattoo, now there are some places that allow membership so long as some coverings are applied, so as not to have the tattoo be exposed. And so that's still a reflection of the general attitudes that persist in certain areas of Japanese society. And so because I live in Japan, and because I live in Japan, then I don't necessarily I'm in a country where there is still this attitude towards tattoos, and so at the moment I don't necessarily think about getting any kind of tattoo, but I do understand the question, and I do understand the sentiment. This idea of an expression of fandom, and also a real expression of loving something and being a real fan of something to the point that you would get some kind of body art tattoo applied to somewhere on your body or on your skin, and that's a show of real of affection and a real love for something. And you pick here the Criterion Collection, and yes, I have a great devotion to the Criterion Collection. It has shown me a lot of great things. It has taught me a lot of great things, and so I understand the question entirely. So maybe let me just answer it this way. Maybe I don't have a tattoo, and maybe I won't necessarily get a tattoo, but I can, of course, I try to express my admiration for the Criterion Collection through other non-tattoo means. And so anyway, I hope that answers your question. Again, I'm sorry if it's not so satisfactory, but it's a great question. So thank you very much for that. And you're in Argentina, so greetings from Argentina, you say. So, and hello to you. Greetings to you from Tokyo to Argentina, my dear friend. And I hope you're well. And let's talk again very soon. So thank you very much. Thank you. And let's see, the next set of questions is from Frank M. So hello, my friend. And you say, hi Daisuke, first of all I want to say thank you for your videos. They're always such a joy to watch and never fail to cheer me up. In your passion for the art form always comes through so strongly. I have a few questions that I would love to hear your thoughts on. My apologies if you have talked about any of these topics in another video. So before I get to the questions, so thank you very much for your really lovely words of compliment. And so I'm completely undeserving of those compliments, my friend, but this is a very lovely comment. So thank you very much. Really, thank you very much. And let's see. So, and then your questions are, number one, to what extent do you find that you own moral? To what extent do you find that your own moral or political beliefs can affect your experience of a film? Have there ever been films where, despite appreciating the evident artistic talent on display, something just didn't sit right with you to the detriment of your enjoyment? I know lots of people, including myself, find this with films like D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation or Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will as a more extreme example. Okay. Number two, what are your thoughts regarding Martin Scorsese's comments about Marvel films? Do you think that Disney's ever-growing empire in the film industry poses a risk to art house cinema? Okay. Number three, finally, are you familiar with the works of Bela Tarr? If so, what are your favorite films of his? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your questions. There's a lot here. So let me see here. Let me try to answer them in reverse order. Let's do it that way. So let me start with your third question first. So the works of Tar. Yes, so Bela Tar is a filmmaker that I haven't spoken about in any detail on this channel, and that's another failing of mine in this channel, and I apologize for that. But I do want to talk more about his works wherever possible, because I'm very fascinated by his works. They are very challenging, and they I think provoke a lot of thought and comment. And so I have been thinking about the possibility, for instance, of maybe trying to approach the work. It's in English. It's sometimes referred to as Satan's Tango. It's also referred to as, please forgive me for my poor pronunciation, but Shatan Tango. And so I was always thinking that I'd love to try to approach that work with some detail sometime on this channel. It's been one of my those projects I've been thinking about, and that's another very challenging work on many levels. And so I thought that would be interesting to try to approach that one of these days. But again, there are always possibilities, and so I will try my best to open up the channel more to this possibility in the future. Again, I can't promise anything, but I will certainly do my best. And then your second question is, what are your thoughts regarding Martin Scorsese's comments about Marvel films? And then you ask a question about Disney. So I think these are actually two separate questions, it sounds like to me. So let me take the first question and the second set of questions here. So what are your thoughts regarding Martin Scorsese's comments about Marvel films? And so I think you're referring to a comment that was reported on sometime last year in 2019, I believe, where Martin Scorsese was reported talking about Marvel films and this notion of what is cinema, what is not cinema, right? And this might sound like I'm evading the question, but I'm really I don't want to sound that way. But let me explain. So, what he said didn't really bother me, or I wasn't necessarily directly affected by what he had said for, I think, two reasons. And the first reason is, I've mentioned this before and I'll say it again, which is that I haven't seen all of the Marvel films. And even now I haven't seen all of the Marvel films. I'm trying, but I haven't seen them. And so I can't really make any direct comment on it, because, as I say, I don't know the films directly, and so I really don't know if I would be able to agree with him or not, because of the fact that I haven't seen the films, and so I have no basis of reference, of common reference with that. And so that's one thing. I mean, I've seen a number of them, but I haven't seen all of them. So that's one thing that really prevents me from, or prevented me from being affected one way or another by his comments. And another thing too is, I always have to try to keep in mind that no matter what anyone might say about a particular film that might say I really like, and maybe there might be a comment that might seem on the surface to seem somewhat dismissive of that film that I like, I'm always of the, or I always try to be of the approach that it's what someone else might say about a film that I like shouldn't, in theory, affect my own views on a film. There can be a debate, there can be discussion, and maybe I might be swayed by a debate. That's one thing. But when it is not a debate yet, or it hasn't reached a debate stage, then my views on a particular film that I like should maintain, or should continue to be, my views. And this has happened to me quite a lot, where I've expressed views on a film, and maybe I've encountered people who have expressed somewhat negative or critical views on the same film. It usually doesn't affect my approach. Of course, I will listen to those voices and I will try to process them, but it won't usually affect my approach on the film. And in fact, I always find those comments to be very refreshing. and quite necessary for me, because it's almost like, how should I put it? It's like working out. It's like weightlifting or working out. It might be a little bit of a crude analogy, but hear me out here. Because it's like when, in order to build a muscle, one needs to apply resistance to the muscle, and that's why we carry heavy weights, because resistance is created by virtue of the heavy weight and the effect of gravity on the heavy weight, thus making the resistance on the muscle palpable and real. And so that creates tension and pain, and thus the end result of that hopefully is a larger muscle, which is the goal, or whatever the goal might be. In other words, through resistance, one gets the end result. And so I always thought that one could try, or I could apply to a certain degree that similar kind of analogy to, let's say, an approach or appreciation of cinema. In other words, negative appraisals or negative viewpoints on a film that I love almost act like resistance. It's almost like those are the heavy weights. And so if one can withstand that heavy weight, then the muscle will grow, or one will get faster in the 100-meter dash, or or one's jump will get higher or something, because the muscles will get stronger or something of that nature. And so I really think that kind of analogy could apply also to this sort of thing. And so even where one perceives, let's say, someone making a comment about, the Marvel films, I don't think that would ultimately affect one's view of the films, because it could be an opportunity to really test one's love and admiration for a particular field of cinema. And if you end up at the end of the day still loving the film, I think you are all the more in a stronger position. So that's how I generally saw it. And also I understand too, I interpreted Martin Scorsese's comments, and when he mentioned the word cinema, I interpreted that word and how he used it to mean a sort of subjective view of cinema, because of course the meaning of cinema is not determined by one person or another, right? It's of course there's a kind of technical definition to it, I understand that, but as a sort of broader context, or as a broader meaning, it is a subjective thing. In other words, cinema is what we bring to it, or what we understand it to be, and because cinema is so vast, there might be different things that we view. Maybe we view cinema here and other people view cinema here, and that sort of thing. And so my point is that I think that term, and especially as used perhaps by Martin Scorsese and in that particular instance, was probably the subjective meaning of the term cinema, which means that I think it was very malleable in terms of its meaning. And because of its malleability, therefore I think one could interpret what he said to be what he views personally in terms of films that move him. And there's nothing to say that the Marvel films, there is a requirement that all Marvel films must move everyone, right? There's no requirement like that at all, and I think that's what he was getting at. But and whether one takes that to extend that to mean a broader statement about all cinema and all people, I think that's a different. I don't interpret it going that far. But even if one took what he said to mean that kind of extended interpretation, then I go back to my earlier comment about resilience in one's views, and it's like training for something, or running a marathon, or working out or something. It's that resilience and resistance that really actually provides a great opportunity to help us to test ourselves and see if we really do love these films, or maybe we might think we do, but in fact we don't. And so, and if we do, then I think our love becomes even stronger at the end of the day. And so I always think of those moments as opportunities. And whether or not Martin Scorsese's comments could be interpreted that way, again, your guess is as good as mine. tend to think that maybe he didn't mean it to go that far, but because of this concept of the malleability of the subjective meaning of the term cinema as he used it. But even so, I think it could be an opportunity for those who were, let's say, affected by what it was that he had to say. So anyway, so that's the first part. And the second question is, do you think that Disney's ever-growing empire, you have in quotes, empire in the film industry poses a risk to art house cinema? Okay, so this is another difficult question, and I understand what you're saying in terms of the acquisition by Disney of certain intellectual property rights and certain existing intellectual property rights, let me put it that way, in terms of the creation side of things, in terms of the distribution side of things. And I think these are two aspects that, of course, might seem to be really current developments in the recent landscape of commercial cinema. And I think what you're referring to is this. It goes into the realm of a legal field, which is called antitrust law, and whether or not the acts and acquisitions of Disney in the long term, whether or not those acts and acquisitions somehow constitute a violation of relevant antitrust law it's a little bit of a tricky question. Well, first of all, I'm not an antitrust lawyer, so I really can't make any direct opinions or informed opinions on this. On the one hand, of course, it probably could be said that there could be some potential antitrust issues, but on the other hand, maybe there are no antitrust issues, or perhaps the antitrust issues are reduced by the fact that we are dealing with certain intellectual property rights, and who is to say that intellectual property rights are finite? I mean, intellectual property rights are based off of the world of creativity, and if one creates something that is popular, that is, one can still create and not necessarily, be reliant on any IP that is owned by a particular entity. So there's that. So I can see that possible nuance in a discussion in the context of antitrust law. But then again, I'm not an antitrust lawyer, so I really can't make any informed guess or opinion on that. Perhaps one of the direct ways that it could affect movie-going experiences would be through the distribution channels, because of the idea that this would affect distribution in the sense that having popular IP would therefore mean that the distribution or the negotiations with distributors would be more and more in favor of the IP owners or the licensor. And so that might mean that distribution chains could be affected over time. And this sort of discussion, I think, has been had by many more expert people than myself, and so I'm not saying anything new here. And so I think that's one of the concerns, or the potential concerns, of course. And this extends also to streaming, and also the idea of streaming wars, and what will happen in a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, etc. And so in a general sense, I do get that, although I'm expressing myself in a very poor way, and I apologize. And so will this affect, let's say, art house cinemas? And I can't deny the possibility that this would affect art house cinemas. And so we always have to keep an eye out for this. But also we have to keep in mind too that there are other factors that will affect, unfortunately, the art house cinemas going forward. And I think one of the most direct potential reasons or circumstances is the current global health crisis that we are still being affected by. And so this will undoubtedly affect theater. It will affect theater sales and theater participation and ticket sales. And so we will see, unfortunately, it's anticipated that we will see kind of economic impact that will probably be felt for a considerable amount of time. And those theaters that are more independent and smaller might feel the economic impact of this. And so this is something that is also of a concern. I know it's not directly your question, but this is also something of a concern. And so, we really have to keep in mind this. And so if you have a local theater that you want to support, maybe there are means by which you can support your local theaters, etc., where you are in the world. But we do have to keep this in mind. It's not, of course, it's not just the issues of having to compete with the big mainstream competitors, but it's also dealing with current unexpected and unforeseen events, global health-related events, and so that is also a concern. But anyway, I'm very sorry I'm not expressing myself very well, but anyway, that's just my general, pretty unfocused way of trying to address, in some degree anyway, the second part of your second question. And your first question is, let me repeat it, when you say, to what extent do you find that your own moral or political beliefs can affect your experience of a film? Have there ever been films where, despite appreciating the evident artistic talent on display, something just doesn't sit right with you to the detriment of your enjoyment? And then you say, I know lots of people, including myself, find this with films like D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation or Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will as a more extreme example. Okay, so this is a very complicated question. It's a great question. I think it's very complicated, but actually, let me take that back. It might seem complicated, but maybe my approach to it might be oversimplified. But let me try to explain how I would approach this question. And so you have two questions here. So the first is, to what extent do you find that your own moral or political beliefs can affect your experience of a film? And I say that all the time. My own set of moral beliefs or my own set of political beliefs, whatever they are, do affect everything, not just my viewing of films, but they affect everything in my life. They affect my daily interactions, they affect how I see the world, and they affect, therefore, how I have interactions on a day-to-day basis, whether it be with certain people or certain groups of people, or maybe with current events, news, and also with media and things of that nature. And it doesn't have to be overt all the time. Maybe it is indirect or implicit. Maybe it is less intense than other instances of that kind of interactive nature, etc. But the point is that they will always be there, and because they inform my own perspective. And when we're thinking about cinema, or when I'm thinking about cinema as being this mode or thing that I perceive, it unfolds before my eyes and I perceive it, then inherent in my perception is something about my own belief systems, or the belief systems that I rely upon. So they always affect they affect the experience of a film. Now this is also very important too, because you say affect your experience of a film. And so this means, therefore, that the way I view the world will affect my experience of a film. Of course it will. And I think that's true for everyone. And again, it depends on the degree, depending on the circumstance, of course. But I think even to a very minute or very maybe almost negligible level degree, I think it still will have a kind of impact. But that's okay. I think there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And I think that even if one comes across a particular situation or film or event of some kind that may, in some form or another, go against one's moral or political beliefs, that doesn't necessarily mean that one needs to disengage from an interaction with that event or thing to begin with. Because I think, just stepping back from the political arena for a bit, but just thinking about just day-to-day things, we act and react in a way. We react to things that we find ourselves attracted to, and also react against things that we find ourselves repulsed by. And this could be in the form of some day-to-day object. It could be in the form of a smell or a taste, maybe food. Sometimes, we see food that we like, but then we see food that we don't like, and we shy away from that. And or maybe we eat something, and maybe we like some of the flavor of it, but we don't like some of the flavor of the rest of it. That sort of thing. And these are very crude, almost terrible ways of trying to create analogy. I admit that, but my point is that I think we are always constantly on a kind of interactive basis with the world around us, whether it be positive interactions or not so positive interactions. And so, there's always a kind of a push and pull, but that's also reflective in nature. And so there's nothing inherently, how should I put it? There's nothing inherently wrong, I see, with feeling, let's say, repulsed by a certain film or a moment in a film that one is seeing, because this idea of being repulsed by something is still an activity that is found in nature. It's found even on the molecular level, and so I find those it's almost a kind of second nature, I think, and so. And that's further informed by how we view the world. And so, yes, so I guess my long-winded way of answering the first part of your first question is yes. It will affect my experience, but it won't necessarily mean that I will always avoid those experiences. I don't know if that makes any sense. I might not. Again, it depends on the circumstances. But let me go to your second question, which is, have there ever been any films where, despite appreciating the evident artistic talent on display, something just didn't sit right with you to the detriment of your enjoyment? Okay, so you mentioned, I have to be very specific here. So you mentioned the word, or the phrase, the detriment of your enjoyment. And this is actually very specific. And I would actually answer this question slightly differently. Maybe it's a great question, of course, but maybe I would replace the word enjoyment with the word engagement. And so I always see this idea of films not always in the sense of whether I enjoy the film or not, but I always try, at least I try, I don't know if I succeed all the time, but I try to look at the film in terms of engaging with the film. That's always, I try to do that. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I fail, of course, but I always think that the key for me is engagement with the film. And why do I say that? I say that because in my mind, engagement can mean a whole number of possibilities, right? Engagement itself is a very broad term because we can engage with things in many different ways. But so sometimes engagement can mean, say, enjoying something. Maybe it might mean reaching a level of empathy. But engagement can also be on the opposite spectrum of this. In other words, we can have almost an antagonistic, adversarial relationship with the film and still be engaged with the film, right? And so even where we have a film that maybe we feel there's some kind of adversarial relationship. In other words, maybe it expresses something that is against our own moral or political beliefs. Even so, I mean, the film is what it is, and we are who we are, and there is this moment of engagement when we act or when we are carrying out the act of actually sitting down and watching this thing. So this is here and we are here, and this process of watching it is the engagement. And whatever that end result of that engagement is, whether it's empathy, whether it's enjoyment, whether it's an adversarial reaction, that is a kind of engagement, at least as far as I'm concerned. Now, again, this can be different for different people, and I won't take that away from anyone else. Maybe for some people, cinema is enjoyment, and anything that is not enjoyable is not something that one will watch. And I completely respect that approach. And if people have that approach, that is great. I'm just speaking about myself, and I'm not making any grand statements about how everyone else should be watching cinema, because I'm not in that place. That's not my right to do so. But if I'm speaking about myself, I always try to think about engagement. Therefore, I can therefore see something that might be, as you say, it doesn't sit right with me, but that doesn't necessarily mean automatically that that will deter me from being engaged with it. It might not. Again, it's a case-by-case situation, and depending on the case, there could be examples where I could watch a film and have an adversarial relationship with it. In other words, I watch it and I, let's say, disagree with it, or maybe vehemently disagree with one or more aspects or ideas that are expressed in that. But still, I watch it because I can only be able to understand, or I can only be able to know what those ideas are by watching it. I can't do it in any other way. It's impossible for me to know what a film is about unless I watch it and see for myself and try to make the determination. And so I never see the act of, I guess this is sort of a side point, I never see the act of watching the film itself. I never see that to be an issue. I always see the issue to be, what is the result of one watching the film? What is the result of this act? Is it, and what level of engagement is the result of that? That's what I see. And so the watching of the film itself, that's not the place where any kind of potential issues might arise, but it's the result of that, based on the way our one's mind will react when we are watching this film. Again, I'm expressing myself very poorly here, but so this is to say, therefore, that even if there is something that is abhorrent, depending on the circumstance, and depending on the content, etc., and just disregarding very extreme examples, but depending on the content, of course, then we might be at the stage where we can still engage with the film, but be adversarial to it. There might be other instances where we might not be able to engage with it at all, because it's just so far removed from any realm of possible engagement that we have set for ourselves, because it just falls outside of it. And this is true not just for cinema. This is true for anything that we encounter in life. Think about the people. Think about your entire life, and think about all the people that you've met in your life, right? Because at least for me anyway, I've met a number of people in my life, many of whom I think fall in that sort of range of, let's say, that range in which I am able to, in some form or another, to engage and interact with those people. Maybe for some people it's a more intimate, closer engagement than with others, granted, but still there is a range within which I am able to engage in interaction or engagement based on my own personality and the circumstances at the time. But there are those instances where I encounter people that just fall out of that range for me. In other words, I am not able to engage in any way with that person. It's just they fall out of the periphery, and that just happens. I think that's the nature of human living in the world right now, and there's nothing that says that we have to be able to engage with every single person on the planet, right? And I think the same is true for, I think that kind of example or analogy can be applied to our own interactions with films, right? We can try our best to establish a kind of range of engagement, shall we say, a range of possible engagement. Any film that for whatever reason falls outside that range, we might not be able to engage with it. But then any film that falls within that range, then depending on where it falls, then maybe it will affect, or it will yield a certain level of engagement, whether it be, as I say, empathy or enjoyment, or something more maybe neutral but still somewhat engaging, maybe somewhat more hostile, or maybe somewhat more adversarial, but still within that range of possible engagement. Anything that falls outside of it, then that's a completely different story. But my point is, this is usually dependent on a case-by-case analysis that is wholly subjective based on your experience. And so this is all to say that when I see a film, I don't necessarily try to find a film that I will enjoy. Or another way to put it, just because I don't enjoy a film doesn't automatically mean that I disengage from it. It depends on the circumstances, but even a lack of enjoyment can still potentially yield a kind of engagement, whatever that might be. Now, you mentioned, for instance, appreciating the evident artistic talent, etc. And so there are moments where you can watch, or I can try to watch a film that I have an adversarial relationship with, and still maybe admire or recognize certain merits of technique or something of that nature. And I think that's not an unreasonable approach for me to have. I mean, again, it depends on the circumstance. There might be films where I can't deal with it, and so therefore I can't even engage with it, even on this objective level of trying to appreciate it for its cinematic worth, whatever that means, or technical craft. Maybe it's just too far for me. I don't know, but whether for films that fall within that range of acceptability, or not acceptability, that range of possible engagement for me, there is still room for me to be able, to some degree anyway, to understand or recognize kind of a technical achievement that is occurring. And why do I say this? Well, again, let me borrow another analogy. And again, I apologize for my over-reliance on analogies, but it's almost like, how should I put it? It's like debates. I don't know if, I'm not a debater, but sometimes we can have a debate with another person. And even though we fall on opposite sides of a debate, someone can admire the way in which the other side has formed his or her debate argument. Right? We might be on the opposite side of that argument, but we can still appreciate the way in which an argument on the other side has been crafted. Okay, so that's one example. Another example, or another analogy, might be, for instance, sports and professional sports. For instance, baseball teams, or even or any sports, tennis players, or things of that nature. When someone is scheduled to have an opponent for the next match, what will the coaches and what will the manager, what will the team do? They will watch the tapes of their opponents and their past games, and they will watch them over and over again, right? In order to try what? To try to identify any weaknesses, to try to check if there are any ways in which one can develop a strategy on game day in order to beat the opponent. The objective of the game is to win. And so in order to try to achieve that, then people will try to assemble as much information about the other side as possible, watch all the tapes, watch them again, and create a strategy. Well, I think something could also potentially occur when one is dealing with a film that, say, is adversarial to our own interests. We can still watch it, and maybe it is a way for us to try to engage further in the debate with respect to that film, because perhaps there is a debate on a society level about whether this film has merit or is meritless, etc. And so when we fall into that kind of debate, then we have two choices. We can either not watch the film because it is so adversarial to us that we don't want to watch the film, or it is adversarial to us and therefore we can watch the film in order to better understand what the other side's arguments are, in order to potentially strengthen our side's arguments in favor of our own arguments, or maybe to rebut anything that might be offered in the ideas or expressions or debates that are being expressed in this film that we're talking about. In other words, the more we understand the other arguments, the potentially stronger our own strategies can be in the context of that discussion. And so I see, therefore, the adversarial relationship with any kind of film, if there is one, to have a potential benefit. And this kind of dialogue can really be quite beneficial. And in fact, I would say further that there is also the potential of, let's say you have an adversarial relationship with a film, and you watch the film, and I think the more that you watch the film and you understand what the film is going for, I think that gives you more opportunity to potentially convince others to agree with your argument, rather than the arguments that are being set forth by the film or by the other side, as it were. And so my point is that even if there is something that might seem to be, you say, doesn't sit right with one's maybe belief system or set of beliefs, I think still there is an opportunity to try to engage in a discussion or a dialogue, and if there is a debate that occurs, to try to successfully maneuver oneself in this debate environment, such that the more that one knows about the particular film, I think the more one is prepared and the more one is strengthened in one's own position. Again, this isn't true for every film like this, and I must insist upon that. There will be films where this is an impossible thing. It's impossible to engage, and I understand that. I completely understand that. But we have to understand, too, that there are many different reasons to watch a film. And so one of those reasons can be enjoyment, but there are other reasons. At least I see other reasons for it. And so, I mean, it's a very vast thing, and we all come to this thing called cinema with potentially different motives and different approaches and philosophies. And so I think that's, I've mentioned it before, but I'll say it again. Like with any other art form, cinema is one way of looking at it is it's sort of a reflection of human nature and the human condition. And if we understand human nature and the human condition to be this really complicated set of connections and synapses and reactions, the brain is a complex computer, a supercomputer in many respects, and it's therefore reflective of something very, very complex. Human condition, the human nature is very complex. Well, therefore, cinema, by extension, can also potentially hold that same or similar degree of complexity. And so, with that, therefore, the assumption being that not every piece of cinema needs to be at a level of enjoyment, but there is a sense of engagement. Now, once again, if that falls outside of the realm of acceptable engagement, vis-a-vis your own subjective philosophy in cinema, I mean, that again depends on the case, so it's a case-by-case basis. But my very long-winded way of answering your question is, it depends. So I'm very sorry about just going on and on like this. I don't think I've made that much sense, and so I really apologize. But and I must admit too that whatever I say, it's always difficult for me too. I always have difficulty sometimes. Let me put it again. I sometimes have difficulty. I sometimes have difficulty with certain films, and I admit that. And so sometimes I really have to struggle, and sometimes I always have to remind myself I don't always have to make the effort, right? I don't always have to make the effort. I can try, but sometimes the film has to meet me halfway, and if I feel like it's not doing that for me, then I can always get up and walk away, right? I don't have to engage. I will, if I see something where there is a potential for some kind of mutual benefit or something, I will certainly try to engage, but I always have to be wary of this. And also I always have to be wary too. There is this idea about propaganda and this idea of cinema as propaganda. And I always have to be careful of this, and I have to keep my reactions in check sometimes. I have to think, is the film operating on me in a way that it's sincere, or is it operating on me in a way that it's trying to act as a kind of propaganda? And whatever the motives of that propaganda is, it really depends on the film, of course. But I always have to keep myself in check. Is it trying to trick me in some way, or is it trying to really present to me a world or a set of ideas that I, as a viewer, can then experience and then make my own judgments on at the end of the film. So I really have to keep this in mind, because sometimes we might be dealing with works that could be having a kind of propaganda type of agenda to them, and so we always have to remember this. I mean, it's the same with people, right? I consider myself very fortunate, of course, but we also have to remember too that every interaction we have, we always have to be wary and wonder, are these genuine interactions, or are these people trying to get something? Are they trying to use me or something like that? And so there is always this idea of trying to just be sure that one is aware of all the circumstances to the extent possible. And I see this also with cinema, right? And I see that it's not all genuinely trying to engage, but there are instances sometimes where there's a kind of level of propaganda going on, and so we have to be wary of this. And so I'm also I also try my best to keep myself in check in terms of the degree to which I will try to proactively engage with something. And so these all details come up, and so it becomes a very potentially difficult thing the more one thinks about it in terms of approaching cinema. But at the same time, if one remains informed and if one remains reasonable in one's approach, not just to cinema but to all things, then I think that, and if one maintains a sound sense of personal judgment, then I think there can be a lot of potentially beneficial things that will result in one's interaction and engagement with a work of cinema, whatever it could be. So anyway, sorry about that, again, long-winded answer, and I don't think it made much sense at all. So I apologize for that, but I hope you can forgive me. And I do want to say once again that I think these are great questions, Frank M. So thank you very much for these, and I hope you're well. Thank you. Okay, so with that, my friends, that is it. And so I'm a little bit sad right now. So thank you so much once again for asking all these questions, and I apologize if my answers were incomplete or unsatisfactory. Again, maybe one of the outcomes of this is just it's exposed how little I know about cinema and the world, and that's okay. I'm always trying to better myself and to learn and to pick up new things and to be guided by your teachings and your insights. And so this was a very worthwhile exercise and series and endeavor for me. So thank you very much for providing me with this opportunity to once again share a little bit of myself with you. That is, and I'm very honored and humbled that you would express your interest in the form of these great questions. And so I really want to thank you once again for everything that you've done. And I'm encouraged to do this again. So it's the end of this particular set of videos for now, but we will pick this up again, and I will post another video. I will make an announcement maybe sometime later this year, and maybe we will do this again, and we can further have discussions going forward. So if you're interested, please stay tuned to this channel going forward. And in the meantime, if you want to ask a question, I can't promise to be able to answer in a video form, but I will certainly do my best to respond in a comment form. So again, I can't promise to be able to answer everything, but if you want, you just leave a comment in a video and I will do my best to get back to you. And so with that, my friends, thank you so much again for everything. And until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. So thank you very much, my dear friends, and cheers.